to mock interviews, and my actual interviews were a lot harder in my opinion. So another must, this is like a must have tip that you need to do before you do any of your interviews, is they might ask you about like face masks and whether or not like face covering should be mandatory, vaccines, should they be mandatory? That I feel like that might come up at some university in terms of their interviews. This is a really good example of a question. Hi guys, so in today's video I thought I'd give you a bunch of tips and examples of questions that you might get in your medicine interviews this year. I know a bunch of unis are doing them online, so I just thought I'd kind of give you a bunch of tips for your online interviews this year. I really hope you find this video helpful. You probably hear this in every single medicine interview video, but you need to talk them through what you're thinking. If they ask you a question, for example, if they ask you like something about the pandemic, this is a really good example of a question. During the height of the pandemic, Captain Tom Moore raised £30 million. How would you spend Captain Tom's donations? With this sort of question, or any question where you have to kind of talk through your answer, just literally talk them through what you're thinking. Like, you would honestly be surprised with a lot of their mark schemes. They're not looking for like a golden sentence or like a perfect phrase that you're going to say that's going to give you full marks. They want to know like your thought process. They genuinely want to know like step by step how you're thinking through things, or like what crossed your mind. Even if it's not the right answer, even if you're like, you know, this could be an option, but I don't think so, because that's still really good. They just want to know your thought process. Another must, this is like a must have tip that you need to do before you do any of your interviews, is make or think of examples of when you've demonstrated certain traits like teamwork, communication, hardworking, like empathy. Think of examples of when you've demonstrated those things. For a lot of them, it'll just be like during some clubs or like sports that you've had, or like things at school, I guess. For like empathy, think of an example of, because that could be a question like, tell me about a time when you've demonstrated empathy. I remember for me, I just spoke about like, I remember back like a long time ago, I had a friend who had a panic attack on a coach. We were going like on like a school trip sort of thing. And that was my empathy example. For you guys, it might be a little bit different, but just think of an example of when you can talk about, I'd say the key ones are teamwork, communication, empathy, and like resilience. Think of an example of each one of those, because that, I guarantee one of those will come up in your interviews. It came up in one of my interviews, and thankfully I had thought of an example, but I was struggling a little bit because I hadn't thought it out fully enough. So I'll give you guys some examples for each one. So for empathy, think of any time when you've like helped a friend or a family member or a person in need. It could even be like, if you do like D&V or St. John's Ambulance, like did you help someone who fell, or did you help someone who like looked distressed? It doesn't even have to be like medically related, like helping them, even if it's just calming someone down who's having a panic attack, or like if someone's like homesick and you comforted them. Think of an example like that. For teamwork, that's really easy, any like club, sports, and yeah, resilience. Think about like when you had to work really hard for something. So if you had like an exam that you were like really worried about, or maybe it was like trying out for like, if you're trying to get onto a certain sports team, you have to work really hard. If you don't think of an example of these, it's totally fine, because with a lot of, if you have MMIs, you do get like a minute outside to read the question and then think of an example. But if you've got an online interview, which I know a lot of places have this year, if you've got a panel interview over Zoom, you're not going to have time to think. So I think you want to be as prepared as you can. So think of these examples beforehand. So a perfect example of a sort of question like this would be, give an example of when you've used your communication skills to improve a situation. Another tip I have is to speak to other people in your interview. Again, if you've got an online interview, this might not apply to you, but if you've got an in-person interview, definitely like speak to the other people there, not to like, purely just to like get to know them, and like you never ever know. I remember when I went to my Newcastle interview, I sat on like a high stool chair, so there was only like space for 3 people, but I sat there, and then this other girl sat there, and I remember I spoke to her and we were both quite nervous, and then we ended up realizing like, oh my gosh, we both went to the same summer school at the same time. And then after the interview, I didn't see her for like months, because it was like interview time, which is like over the winter. And then, but yeah, eventually like a few months went by, and then I remember when I actually got to Newcastle, I ended up meeting her again, and we're literally on the same course in the same year, we're both studying medicine. So you never know who you'll meet, and you'll never know if you're going to see the person again. I don't think you need to speak to people just to like about medicine. Like you don't have to do that if you don't want to. You don't have to talk about interviews to the people there, but just get to know them. Like you never know when you'll see them again. Like you might end up making like a lifelong friend or something. So yeah, definitely speak to other people there. And it might help to like calm your nerves a little bit if you're like relaxed, just speaking to people, like trying to make friends. You won't stress out as much as like what are the questions going to be and stuff like that. This one isn't really a tip, it's just me like giving a warning, but be prepared to be asked really obscure and strange questions. If you're applying to like Oxbridge or like even Cardiff, apparently Cardiff has a rep of like asking really dodgy questions. So no, Glasgow, apparently Glasgow asked this question, which was, how have you developed manual dexterity skills? Bruh. That was on the Medic Mind page for Glasgow. Apparently like they've asked that in the past. I don't know how accurate Medic Mind is. Medic Mind has a bunch of different questions for each university. The best thing that you can do for these is just to practice as much as you can. I know getting mock interviews is really difficult, depending on your school, if they're very supportive and if you've got like family and friends willing to help you. But I have already put out, I think, 3 mock interview videos. One of them is from this year, so it's really up to date with like COVID-19 questions and like relevant like ethical stuff. So hopefully those will be helpful for you guys, because I know it's really difficult to get interview practice, but literally that's the best thing that you can do. Practice as much as you can. Even if you have no one to practice with, I would say make yourself like a list of questions that you think are quite difficult. You don't want to ask yourself easy questions, because I honestly think when I had 2 mock interviews and my actual interviews were a lot harder in my opinion. So you want to give yourself hard questions to prepare yourself for the actual interview, because I think the interview is a lot harder. But I don't know whether it's just because I was like nervous and anxious and stressed. I don't know. Yeah, there's always ways to practice, and try and incorporate some really strange and random questions into your interviews to help prepare you for the dodgy questions that they might ask. Okay, so an example of a question that they might ask you in terms of really like wild and wacky out there questions is, how can you calculate the number of moles inside this glass of water? Apparently this was on the Cardiff website, on the Medic Mind Cardiff website. Another tip that I have is to watch the news. This is super relevant because, especially if there's like ethical things happening at the time, or with COVID, like you never know what update is coming up around the corner. Like you don't even know. They might ask you about like face masks and whether or not like face covering should be mandatory, vaccines, should they be mandatory? That I feel like that might come up at some university in terms of their interviews. I mean, it's totally fine if you go into an interview not knowing about a certain topic. That happens every single year. It happens to people all the time. I remember one of my friends at Hull York, her friends, she went into a station about the Bauer Garber case and she didn't know anything about it. Like she'd never ever heard of Bauer Garber at all, but you can still answer the question, because I think they give you enough information to know about it to like answer the question. But it's always best if you go into it knowing about certain things. So watch the news and try and read up on ethics beforehand, so that you don't have to like be completely clueless. On the Medic portal there was something about cavities in children, so they could ask you something like, what do you think about the increase in cavities occurring in children in the UK? That's a hard one. I don't even know what I would say for that. This might be more of a dentistry question, but it was on the Medic portal, so I don't really know. If you kind of keep up to date with the news, you might not be as shocked when you get certain questions like this, because you've at least seen it before. If your interview is in person, I definitely recommend to explore the city a little bit. If you've not seen that university on an open day in person, then definitely recommend like sticking around a little bit after your interview and just like explore the city a little bit. Go to like a restaurant with your parents or whoever you're with. Go out for like bowling, go out for drinks if that's your fit, if you're legal as well, like only if you're of age. And yeah, explore the city, because you're going to be spending so long there. I'm sure if you've got an interview there, you've probably already seen it, or at least seen like a virtual tour. But with things opening up now, like definitely explore the city a little bit, just for like the afternoon or like the morning, to get the feel of it. Like yeah, it's obviously like exploring the city with your parent and then exploring it with like actual friends, like during Freshers Week, during your first few months. That's totally different, but like at least you'll still get a feel of like what it's like, and you can see if you like the city or not. Worst case scenario, even if you don't like a city and if you don't really enjoy like your interview, you felt like it didn't go that well, you didn't really like the city centre, and like most medical schools have such a tight-knit community that you'll probably have a good time anyway. Like medics are so like, medics tend to stick together. Like if like almost all the medic people that I know, including myself, are only friends with other medicine people. Like it's such a bad habit, but medics tend to stick together. So even if you aren't like loving the city, or like you didn't really enjoy your interview, you didn't really like speak to anyone there, you didn't manage to make any friends on your interview day, like don't worry, because when you actually get to medical school, everyone is so like tight-knit. It's such a tight-knit community. I definitely recommend practicing data interpretation. At my Sunderland interview, and I think they still do it now, I had like quite a short exam. It was like a numeracy test where basically they ask you a bunch of questions relating to like percentages, decimals, like calculating little things. And if someone asked me on Instagram, like, is it hard? And I was like, it was I don't want to say it was easy because I don't want to sound like arrogant or anything, but it was, if you do A-level chemistry or A-level maths, you've got nothing to worry about with Sunderland numeracy test. If you haven't got an interview at Sunderland though, definitely practice some data interpretation questions. Like there could be a question where they give you a graph and they're like, explain this graph to a patient, or they could give you like a set of numbers, a set of graphs, a set of like data, and then like explain this to like a regular person or like a lay person. So yeah, I say practice those. Those stations are all about just communication and not using jargon. That's a big thing when you get to medical school. But yeah, I would definitely practice some data interpretation questions because that could come up. And one of my biggest tips would be to check before you go to actual interview, like what they might ask you about. A lot of universities, they'll put on their website like what they're going to actually ask you about. So I'm on the Manchester website, and it says here that they're going to ask you about your ability to communicate. So I'm guessing they might ask you a question where it's like, explain, it could be like a role play, it could be like, explain this to a patient, or pretend that you're a medical student and you have to break bad news or something like that. It says, why do you want to become a doctor? That, I don't know if that actually comes up because it's such like an obvious question. Previous caring experience, that's pretty much just like work experience. So again, like think of examples because they might ask you about, like, mention a moment on your work experience that really stood out. And then yeah, ethics. This ethics is guaranteed to come up in every single medical school's interview. It's guaranteed to come up. That's why I think it's so important to watch the news. For a lot of universities, MedicMind has like a section on their website where they go through each individual medical school and they put like their own questions. I don't know how accurate that is, but for Newcastle, MedicMind thinks that they might ask you guys about, it says integrity, communication, empathy, compatibility with the MBBS program, which they definitely did ask me at my interview, and then persistence and resilience. For Birmingham, it says debating a medical hot topic, qualities needed to be a doctor, and medical ethics, and then data interpretation. They ask you that at Birmingham, so you definitely need to practice it if you've got an interview there. For some universities, as part of your interview, they'll actually get your personal statement out and kind of like ask you questions about it. So with that, again, like, find out which universities that you're being interviewed at will do that, so that before that interview you can like go through it properly, think of all the little things that they might ask you about. You could also get a friend to kind of read your personal statement and say like, think of 5 different questions that they might ask me, and then you could actually practice those. So yeah, at Sunderland they actually do ask you about your personal statement. For Imperial, it says that they ask about teamwork, leadership, motivation to do medicine, understanding the role of a doctor, breaking bad news. A lot of them, it is like so similar, I'm sure you can tell. Like a lot of them they ask about teamwork, some of them ask about resilience, ethics. They tend to repeat themselves, but you'd be surprised. Interviews can be so different. Like I only had 2 interviews. My Newcastle one and my Sunderland one was so different, even though they are similar things. So just honestly, the best advice I have is to like prepare as much as you can and do at least 2 mock interviews, I would say. I did 2 and I felt like that was enough, but if you can do more, that's good. You don't want to overdo it because you might stress yourself out. Yeah, you could do them like back to back, the mock interviews, if you wanted to. You can kind of space it out as you want, but just do what works for you and do what's gonna make you as least stressy as possible. There's also so many practice questions available online. You've probably seen the ones on the Medic portal a bunch of times because I use them quite a lot in my videos, but there's a website called theaspiringmedics.co.uk and they've got so many questions to do with so many topics, and there's questions that I've actually never seen before. So I definitely, if you want some practice questions for your own like practice, go to theaspiringmedics.co.uk. So my last tip is to make a little checklist the night before your interview, just to check that you've got everything that you need. So make sure that you pack a bottle of water. I think at my Sunderland interview, they gave you like a bottle of water like as the stations went around, because if you're talking for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, your throat gets dry. Like even filming this video, I've only been filming for like 20 minutes, but my throat is like dry. So I would say bring a bottle of water if you can, because at my Newcastle interview they didn't give us bottles of water, but at Sunderland they did, and I'm sure with every other medical school it varies as well. And obviously if you've got an online interview, have like a cup of water next to you or something, just so that you're not getting like a dry throat and that's affecting you. Make sure you obviously pack smart clothes or wear smart clothes if you're going to your interview. You definitely want a rough idea of what to expect, and you want to have done like at least one practice this interview. You definitely want a good night's rest, and definitely like a proper meal before your interview, breakfast or lunch. And hot topics is literally just as simple as like watching a video on it, or like reading through the medic pool, watching the news. It doesn't have to be anything too intense. And then last but not least, you want to calm your nerves, because if you do get like anxious or stressed, when you're anxious, like it affects you so much. Like you'd be surprised. I could be like the most prepared person ever for an interview, but if I'm anxious, I'm gonna perform terribly. So whenever I'm going into like a stressful situation, I always know like I need to calm myself down as much as possible. So if that's you, definitely try and do that as well before your interview. But I really hope you guys found this video helpful, and let me know if you want any more MMI videos this year. And yeah, like please guys, if you've got an interview, or if you've like done your interview, let me know how it goes, because last year I got a bunch of you guys messaging me. I'd be so like intrigued if it goes well or if it doesn't. Like please let me know, DM me on Instagram or leave a comment. But yeah, I really hope it goes well, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.